Star Wars fans rejoice, for the wait is finally over. The Bad Batch Season 2 has arrived with its 2-episode premiere, bringing us Spoils of War and Ruins of War. This week largely revolved around a heist on a very cool Clone Wars era planet, as we learned about what the Squad, as well as the Empire, have been up to during the 6 months since Season 1's finale. With that in mind, we have plenty to go over this week, so let's get going. Spoilers are, of course, ahead for The Bad Batch, Season 2, Episodes 1 and 2.
And you waited until now to mention it?
Well, I thought it was obvious.
Episode 1, Spoils of War, begins with the opening sequence of the trailer Disney dropped about a month ago. We're on a tropical island, and Hunter, Wrecker, and Echo are running from these gigantic crab-like creatures. The entire group has newer, much more kit-bashed and rugged looks, as we discussed in our Season 2 preview video. While the three run from the crabs, Omega and Tech are back at the Bad Batch's ship, the Marauder. Omega is studying up on Imperial ships, specifically the V-Wing. My fellow classic Battlefront 2 players will be very familiar with those. Hunter calls in for an extraction, and Tech prepares to take off, just as more of those crabs now climb on top of the ship. Omega falls out, but catches onto a tow cable and begins to use her bow to ward off the creatures. She nails quite a few of them, showcasing her proficiency with the weapon and just how much she's grown as an asset to the team since last season. Soon enough though, they are able to extract Hunter, Wrecker, and Echo and are on their way back to Sid's bar, still taking missions for the Trandoshan in order to get money in their pocket and food in their stomachs. Also at Sid's bar is the droid AZ, who the team rescued from Kamino in the Season 1 finale. Sid's office contained many of the same Easter eggs we saw last season, like the clone pilot helmet and white prototype Boba Fett-esque Mandalorian helmet. There's also this arcade cabinet with a clone trooper on it. We then meet Fee, a pirate friend of Sid's, who goes on to question why Clone Force 99 doesn't look like the typical clones, and then flirts with Tech. Fee was there to give Sid intel on a new mission for the Batch, but thanks to the trailers, we know we'll be seeing more of her. Since she is a pirate, is there a chance we could also see another familiar pirate this season?
I smell profit. Nice, juicy, fat, warm profits.
Their new mission will take them to a familiar location, Count Dooku's palace on the planet Sereno. It turns out that since Dooku died in Revenge of the Sith, and the Separatist movement is over, there's now a huge war chest just sitting there in his palace, ripe for the taking. Hunter declines the mission and says it is too much of a risk. The Bad Batch have remained off the Empire's radar since Kamino, and he wants to keep it that way. However, the rest of the team are on board and manage to convince him. The money could help buy the members a future and would be worth more than any job they've ever done for Sid. While Hunter, Wrecker, and Tech are in it for their own gain and securing Omega's future, Echo suggests using the money to fight back against the Empire, buying weapons and larger numbers to help their brothers. He thinks they should be doing more. It's nice to see Echo's point of view differing more from Hunter and the rest of the squads. After all, he was a regular clone before undergoing his cybernetic mutations. It makes much more sense for him to have a point of view similar to that of Captain Rex. He did feel a little bit more one-dimensional and like a less important member of the Bad Batch in Season 1. It's nice to see a little bit of a change.
Is there an Echo in here?
Yes,
What?
I'm Echo.
Echo mentions that they're in this situation because of Omega, and that he doesn't disagree with rescuing her, but that the squad needs to stop laying low and hiding. When they arrive on Sereno, the team finds the city in ruins after an orbital bombardment by the Empire, just like they did with Tapoka City.
Open fire.
That and the treasure is already being looted by the Empire. The team moves in. Hunter tries to create a diversion for escape, Wrecker watches the door, and Tech, Echo, and Omega try to steal their own piece of Dooku's loot. Tech explains to Omega that the war chest consists of riches from the worlds that Dooku and the Separatists controlled and exploited during the Clone Wars. Wrecker is forced to stun a Reg clone, who nearly discovers the team. We then meet Captain Wilco, a clone captain in the Imperial Army, and the one leading the operation on Sereno. Wilco attempts to contact the clone, which Wrecker stunned, but he of course doesn't respond, raising some suspicion. Hunter sets off an explosive and blows up a pair of V-Wings, diverting the Red Clone Trooper's attention. The team is then split up, with Tech, Echo, and Omega trapped inside the container of Dooku's loot, while Wrecker and Hunter are outside. The container is sealed and begins to take off. Hunter and Wrecker engage the regs and grab onto the side of the container as it launches, Wrecker's fear of heights coming up once again.
Well, I'm not scared of nothing. When I'm up real high, I got a problem with gravity.
They then end up jumping off and are now at the top of Dooku's palace, being shot at by the clones below. Throughout the episodes, the Bad Batch continue to stun the other clones, as opposed to outright killing them. As the shootout continues, Hunter and Wrecker are pinned down at once was Count Dooku's desk. They throw a smoke bomb and use a trap door in the floor to escape, like we've seen Dooku put to use in the past. Meanwhile, Tech is able to initiate the ship's cargo release as he, Echo, and Omega are sent plummeting to the planet's surface to close out Episode 1. That of course brings us into Episode 2, Ruins of War. The three in the container continue to descend and hope that the re-entry boosters will soon activate, which they do. Hunter and Wrecker are also escaping Dooku's palace, preparing to use an ascension cable to rappel down and sneak through the city ruins and back to the Marauder. The container finally crash lands on the ledge of a cliff, and as Tech, Echo, and Omega try to walk to the exit, the shift in weight sends it stumbling off the ledge. A crate lands on Tech's leg, injuring him as the container finally stops, still halfway up the side of that cliff. Captain Wilco instructs his men to search all 50 of the container crash sites for survivors and heads into the city to search for Hunter and Wrecker. Tech, Echo, and Omega make their way into the forest and meet a local named Romar. He tells them to leave the treasure and go home, that it is cursed. Dooku didn't steal only from outside worlds, but from his own Serenian people, and his request for power ruined everything for the locals. Later at Romar's home, Tech sees their host working on a data core, which he calls a piece of separatist technology, before being corrected by Romar, who explains that it's a Serenian archive, technology that had been appropriated by the separatists for the Clone Wars. Romar is trying to preserve his people's history and knowledge from a time before the war, which Tech is surprised to hear. He never thought about it that way. The conflict was fought by people who had some genuinely good reasons and goals, but the separatists were of course corrupted and controlled by the Sith. While in hiding, Omega receives a kaleidoscope from Romar to play with, though she immediately asks if it's part of the treasure. Season 1 spent so much time with Omega as the defenseless child who needed to be saved by the Bad Batch. It didn't really have time to explore the fact that Omega is a child in a war zone. Sure, she's technically older than her brothers, but Omega had never experienced life outside of the Kamino labs, and now all she knows is to fight and run with her squad. Meanwhile, the Empire are setting up a perimeter around the city, which Hunter notices and tells the squad to go radio silent in case their comms are being tapped. They need some firepower to escape, and Hunter spots a few damaged separatist armored assault tanks, which we know from the Battle of Naboo in The Phantom Menace and several episodes of the Clone Wars, including the very first episode when Yoda took on a few of them on his own. However, Wrecker isn't able to power up the damaged AATs as Wilco and his men arrive and open fire. Hunter provides cover fire and throws another smoke bomb, as Wrecker is able to power up some sort of a makeshift missile launcher to take down an incoming V-Wing and ward off the troopers. It's a pretty sick weapon that I'd love to see Wrecker continue to use. As Tech and Echo continue to talk to Romar, they realize that Omega is gone, and so is Romar's rappelling cable. Echo runs and finds Omega inside of the war chest, just as clones arrive on bark speeder bikes. The clones also set up what looks to be an E-Web cannon, which we know from the Season 1 finale of The Mandalorian. Tech limps over and begins to stun the troopers. Based off of the music and how much he was struggling, I almost thought this was it for Tech, but he does manage to survive. Echo is attempting to get Omega out of the container, but she's trying to grab some of the treasure from the war chest, having heard what Echo told Hunter last episode, and knowing it could have given the group the life they might have had if they weren't stuck with her, but Echo convinces her to let it go. As he explains, they were never going to have normal life, regardless of Omega joining the team. After all, if the Bad Batch had stayed behind, they would still be working for the Empire, or even worse. As they leave the container, an LAAT gunship is flying over, and more speeders are heading towards them. Tech uses the E-Web cannon to shoot down the ship and the speeders, as Romar uses one to pull Echo and Omega up the cliff face. Just then, the Marauder pulls up for extraction. Romar gives Omega the kaleidoscope to keep. Omega and Echo share one more heartfelt moment aboard, Echo telling her he'd do it all again. We then cut back to Captain Wilco, as he is reporting back to his supervisor, Vice Admiral Rampart, the same man who ordered the bombardment of Camino last season. Rampart tells Captain Wilco that there's an inaccuracy in his report. It states that Clone Force 99 tried to steal the war chest. Of course, that cannot be, since they perished on Camino. If Tarkin were to find out about this and discovered that the Empire failed in capturing or killing the Bad Batch, there would be severe consequences. So instead, a new report will be submitted to correct this mistake. When Wilco refuses to falsify his report and lie, Rampart shoots him to close out the episode. And that does it for the 2-episode premiere of The Bad Batch Season 2. What did you think of Spoils of War and Ruins of War? Let us know in the comments below. Next week's episode is titled The Solitary Clone. Hopefully that means the beginning of Crosshair's plotline and maybe even some good old Commander Cody content. Be sure to subscribe and join us right here next week for our Episode 3 breakdown. As always, thank you so much for watching and may the Force be with you. Red 5, standing by.